Hi, friends. Thank you for being here on the Birth and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany, and today I am sharing a very personal story with you all. I'm actually sharing the birth of my daughter, Soraya, and as many of you might know already, it wasn't quite the peaceful, beautiful, sacred birth experience that I had thought it would be. And I ended up navigating through a lot of birth trauma for the last 2.5 years. And today I share with you guys me coming full circle and really finding healing and peace and completely shifting my mindset and using that trauma to ultimately guide me to better support women, honestly, and to really sink even deeper into my purpose as a birth coach, as a doula, as a sister choosing to support women through the phases of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And I hope you all enjoy hearing my thoughts and reflection on that birth. And I share something really exciting with you all too, that I have a new offering that I'm putting out in the world February 22nd. It is a journal, a very, very comprehensive guided journal called Healing Birth Wounds. And it's over 100 pages, and it's essentially my guide to healing from birth trauma based off of the questions that I asked myself and questions that other really wise women asked me that helped me ultimately come to the conclusion that I came to, that allowed me to be at peace and to fully heal and to fully own my experience and not be a victim in that anymore. And it is just the best feeling to come out of trauma feeling even stronger and more laser focused on what your true purpose is. And that is exactly what happened with me. And so I'm just really excited for you guys to hear. I do want to give a trigger warning that this is a traumatic birth story. So if you're not up for hearing that, I totally understand. But for those of you who do want to listen, I really appreciate you hearing my story. I'm just going to go ahead and say that this is our third time recording this story. I'm not going to pretend that it's not.
God willing, we are going to get this story out there.
Yeah, for some reason, the enemy doesn't want me sharing this. The first time we recorded it, which was like when we first started the podcast, and it was awful quality. And then the second time, which was earlier today, we recorded like 2.5 hours of of stuff to offer you guys. We were gonna split this episode into 2 parts, and then I realized I never pressed record. So we're here and we're doing it. So
third time's the charm.
It is. And now I'm even more excited because I'm like, the enemy is coming for us, and that must mean that we got some good stuff here to offer the world. So basically, I'm just going to share my birth story of my daughter. It's not like a super blissful, beautiful, sacred birth story. it was a pretty traumatic experience for me, and I'm sharing it with the intention to just shed light on what um, birth sabotage looks like, what care from a medical midwife can look like, and how they're very much just an extension of the, obstetric system. And I know that I was super blindsided and didn't realize that when I was, preparing for my daughter's birth, of course. Um, and after being on a long journey of healing my birth trauma, um, really diving deeper into birth work, I see the value in sharing this. And yeah, so I just hope that it's received well. And I did want to just preface with that because I am aware that some of these things may be triggering. Um, so yeah, so I my husband and I decided in January of 2021, while like the world was crumbling, that we were going to try to have a baby.
Perfect timing. That's what I did
Yeah,
too.
like everything's great, right? Like let's have a baby. So we very purposefully conceived. And in February I found out I was pregnant. We were just over the moon. Um Brief background on like where I was at that time in my life. This was before I had gotten saved, and I was still like very deep in witchcraft and new age practices and things like that. So it was actually just that same like week, I want to say, I'm pretty sure that I found out I was pregnant. I had also uncovered some memories that were like stuck in my subconscious while I was doing some trauma healing work. And I remembered that I had been raped when I was 12, and it was just like a whole world in my mind had been revealed to me. Um and it just really shook me. And of course, at this time I wasn't walking with the Lord, so I felt really alone. I was definitely in a dark place in general, but obviously, you know figuring out that a lot of these like trauma responses that I was experiencing were actually like uh tied to this memory that I had suppressed for, like 16 years of my life. So so that was pretty wild. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I was like doing all of my Reiki. I was like a Reiki master at the time. So I was doing Reiki, I was doing psychic readings for people. And um, but like finding out I was pregnant really just shifted me almost like immediately. And I was feeling like uh like nudges that I was getting from Jesus. And just that next month in March, I had a supernatural encounter with him and was saved. So there was just like a lot of intense shifts happening in my life, along with finding out that I was pregnant, which was super exciting. But I was very overwhelmed at that time in my life. I was also um, closing down two businesses that I had spent like the last 5 years building. And they were my they were my source of income. Like that was, what I did. And
Yeah.
because they were so tied to the new age and so tied to like all of the darkness, I wanted nothing to do with it once I got saved. So I was just going through like major, major, major shifts. And like, I feel like I was going through this like identity crisis. My like everything that I thought was real wasn't, and it just felt like everything was crumbling. And
Yeah,
I
like
was
your
just like
whole world just
pregnant.
got, yeah, flipped upside down.
Yeah. And to add to that, I had just enrolled to start getting certified as a doula and a childbirth educator. And so I was making that big, drastic shift, which, I had been called to that work for like 10 years. Like it was 10 years ago when I told myself that I was going to be a doula when I was in massage therapy school. And so finally making that jump to do that was like so big for me. And I just feel like spiritually, there was just really so much happening rapidly. And so I say all of that because th- that was what had my attention during my pregnancy instead of really preparing for birth. And I felt so overwhelmed with regular life, just, the closing of my businesses, trying to reinvent who I am as a person and discovering that, oh, for the last 8 years, I've been dabbling in witchcraft and doing Satan's work and thinking I'm God. And now I'm like so humbled, but my ego was like being broken to the ground, and so I believe that because of that, I was suffering a lot in my pregnancy on a physical
Yeah.
level. And um, I had really intense morning sickness. I had gone to the doctor just because I was like concerned because I couldn't even drink water. And they, diagnosed me with HG and all of that.
And when did that start, the HG?
The HG started around, I want to say it was like week 11, and it didn't really subside until I want to say about week 30. So it was like a good chunk of time. Um, and of course, now 3 years later, looking back, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I was going through such drastic shifts, and it was really affecting me, like health wise. And so I had always wanted to free birth. Like I had my son when I was 17. Um, I watched The Business of Being Born. I was like, I want a water birth. I want a home birth. And like my parents were like, yeah, no. Like this is what your
For
insurance
your for
covers.
your first for your first birth, you wanted a home birth and a water birth?
Yeah, I watched Ricky Lake's documentary, The Business of Being Born, and she had a home birth, and
Yeah.
and she was just like exposing the medical system for all the nonsense that and all the abuse. And yeah, I like ate it all up, and I was like, this totally makes sense to me. Um, and this is what I want. And my dad was like, well, our insurance doesn't cover that, and we're not paying out of pocket for that. So, you know,
Talking about the midwife who would have to attend
yes,
your home birth, right? Yeah.
yes, 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 yes.
Because
Because of
free
course
birth
at
is
17
pretty
is
inexpensive.
free.
Yeah,
Yes. So at 17, I was not thinking about free birth at all.
right. So
At seven,
when do you think free birth came on your radar? Just
yeah. So it was about a few years after my son's birth, and his birth wasn't super traumatic. Actually, I had consented to everything that was done to me. Like I willingly did everything, that took place. No one really was like trying to, coerce me to do things that I didn't want to do. But it wasn't the birth that I had ultimately envisioned. But I was 17. And so honestly, for my age, I am actually more surprised that it went as smoothly as it did. But um, a
so
few
for this
years
birth,
after.
So for this
Yeah.
birth, you knew that you wanted the home birth.
So for my daughter's birth, by that point I had already discovered what free birth was. So I was intrigued by free birth. I had been listening to the Free Birth Society for, as long as it had been around. I want to say like since like 2016 or something like that. And I just loved like listening to the stories. I found them to be like just really awesome. And um but I hadn't like really wrapped my head around me doing that myself like prior to having my daughter. Like we were just like, oh, let's have a baby, and we didn't think about it past that point. And then when I got pregnant, I was like, oh, life is crazy. I'm not even going to think about the birth. And then around like 20 weeks, I was like, okay, we got to start thinking about what we're going to do. And I had been sick, I had been feeling like really not well because of DHG and everything. And so I was like, I feel like I could really use support from like a midwife. And so at that time, deciding like that obviously I didn't want to go to a hospital. And I guess that's not obvious to people who don't know me, but I definitely didn't want to go to the hospital. I was unsure of whether I was going to birth at home unassisted or with a midwife or some kind of birth keeper. Um, I had been speaking to a birth keeper in my area in the very, very beginning of my pregnancy when I first found out. And this was before I had gotten saved. And she was like a womb witch kind of like birth keeper. And so
Yeah.
she had a lot of like influence from like the new age and things like that. And so once I got saved, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to bring that
Yeah.
into my birth space because I just didn't feel like it didn't sit right with me. Um, but I was like still nervous to commit to doing it unassisted because honestly, I didn't want to take the responsibility on of having to learn all of the things to feel like 100% prepared to make that decision. And because I'm, you know, kind of a control freak, like I like to have all of my things in order before I say that I'm going to do something. And so for me, I couldn't even get to the point of trying to like wrap my head around doing all the birth prep
Right.
required in my head required to, you know, free birth
Right.
comfortably. Um,
So
so I just,
you said that at 20 weeks is when you first started seeing your midwife, and this was so your HG started at like you said 11 weeks. So you're already struggling with the HG, and that heavily influences like, okay, I know I definitely want someone there to support me. So you meet your midwife. What was that like?
yeah, so I had seen in between this, I did see an OB once, just to confirm the pregnancy and make sure that everything was okay because I was so sick that I was like a little nervous about more because of like my dehydration and just all of those things. So I had gotten um, that one sonogram at that appointment, and then around 20 weeks is when I spoke to the midwife that I had been researching about. And um yeah, I basically told her everything that I was looking for, which was the closest thing to, unassisted birth. I want her to be super hands off. Basically, I don't even want to know that you're in the space unless I need you or unless I ask or, things like that. And I was like, and I don't want to take any tests. I don't want to do cervical exams. Like all of the things, like I was like, I don't want it. So, are you going to be able to support me in that? And she was like, totally on board. she was like, yeah, sounds great. I trust birth, I trust that your body can do it. And if you don't want me to, do cervical exams and, use the Doppler and, all those things, like that's totally fine. And I was like, okay, great. Um, and the appointments, like all of the appointments that we had up until, the last handful, just kind of like reaffirmed that for me. Like, yeah, okay, this woman is respecting me. She's respecting my preferences. I was declining all of the prenatal tests that she was offering me, and she didn't have much to say about any of that. And she just was really respectful. Um, so I felt really good about it. To me, I was like, okay, it's just going to be me and my husband. I had later on in the pregnancy decided that I wanted my mom there too. Um, and I was like, and she'll just be there if I need her, but like, I don't want her really to be there unless I need her. So it'll basically be like I'm an undisturbed, home birth like I want.
Yeah,
Um,
she's just there if I need her, but she's not going to like be super hands-on.
yeah, like I
Right.
specifically said, I was like, hey, I want you to be really hands off unless I need you and I ask. But like I need to ask. And like I kept saying it in different ways, like, because I wasn't completely oblivious to birth sabotage or midwifery, sabotage. Like I had heard many of these stories, which was why I made sure to ask the questions I asked and say the things that, I um, said to her. And, I also want to like go back to the fact that I was under so much stress in this pregnancy that I know, like looking back, that I was too scared to own my own experience. And that's huge. That's like the biggest part of all of this is that because I was so overwhelmed with life, and I had other things going on too. I was in a court battle with my son's father. I was living in New York City when they were mandating all of the jabs, and I wasn't able to like go to the supermarket. And it was like, okay, like, how are we gonna like live our lives here? And so there was a lot, and I was definitely in fight or flight mode for a lot of the pregnancy.
Hmm.
Um, and so I did very minimal mindset work to mentally prepare for birth, let alone to completely own my birth experience by free birthing, um, so getting the midwife was like the next best option in my head. I'm like, well, I still don't have to go into the hospital. I can stay at home. And that was the most important factor, at that point for me. I was also like hearing these awful stories about how in the hospitals in New York City, they were keeping the babies in the NICU away from their parents if they tested positive for COVID or if the parent tested positive for COVID. And so there was
Wow.
just a lot of fear around just like that specific time period, like for that specific time period, but also like fear around the hospital. So that was
Hmm.
like the big thing that I was focused on avoiding. My mind wasn't really on like, oh, what if my midwife sabotages my birth? Like what
You
if my
just really
midwife,
didn't want to end up in the hospital, period.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I am, other than all of the life stress, like things are pretty, straightforward. And around like 37, 38 weeks, my daughter was breech. And so there was a little stress around that. Like, oh, how do we how do I flip her? How do I make sure that she's like in the right position and all of that? And so that was really stressful. And then she finally turned around, like, I think it was like 39 weeks or like maybe it was 40 weeks. And I was like, okay, well, thank God for that. Like, okay. And it was constantly like, am I doing all the things right so that I'm allowed to have my baby at home? Like,
Yeah.
that's what it felt like. Just, okay, I did this now. Can I have my baby at home? Um, and so,
So
yeah,
wait,
it
two
was
things.
exhausting.
Did you know that did you find out the gender? Did you find out the sex of your baby?
Oh yeah. So there was a little funny story around that. So from the moment we conceived, I knew I was having a girl. I had been having dreams and all of that. Like I know that God was just like letting me know that he was going to give me my daughter. And so around 20 weeks when I had well, it was actually around like 24 weeks when I had had my first appointment with my midwife. She was like, "Hey, do you want to do an anatomy scan? You don't have to." Um I had gotten a blood test um like earlier in my pregnancy saying that I was having a boy, and I did not believe that. I was like, there's no way. Like, I know that I'm having a girl. My husband was super excited though. I feel so bad. He was like, "What? We're having a boy?" And I'm like crying and I'm like, "No, we're not." He's like, "They're like 99.9% accurate." Um, so anyways, I wanted to do the anatomy scan because I wanted them to tell me that it was a girl. So we went
And
for
it
the anatomy
was a
scan and
girl.
it was a girl. And I was like,
Okay.
"See, I told you." And everyone was like, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah, I
How
just
did you know that?
that's just a really interesting part of your story that I wanted to touch on because I know that happens, right? Where you get like, what if you get a blood test and then you never get an ultrasound? You think that
Yeah.
you're having a boy this entire pregnancy when your
Yup.
intuition is eating at you, like, no, I think it's a girl, but the test told me it was a boy. And then you give birth to a girl baby. So just goes to
It's so
show that
funny.
the technology isn't
Fails
always
us.
100% accurate. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And then you said throughout your pregnancy, you were very like you didn't want to do many tests. Was there anything that you did partake in that your midwife was offering you, like any of the
Yeah, so
testing or genetic testing?
no, I didn't do any of that. I did take um the glucose test because she was like, I was like, "Yeah, I'm not doing that." And she was like, "Can I ask why?" And I was like, "Because I'm not taking that poison drink." And she was like, "Well, no, I do it with like grape juice or cranberry juice, and that's pretty much it." And I was like, "Okay, well, if it's that easy, then I'll do it." And and so I did it, and like it came out fine. I mean, looking back, I probably would opt to, well, look, I wouldn't do any of that again, but like um yeah, it's pretty pointless, but
Okay.
I did that as well as the anatomy scan, and that's it.
Okay.
Um
All
so
right. So
so
yeah,
yeah,
back to the end of your pregnancy, you said you were doing all the things to make sure you could get the home birth you wanted. The baby was breech. You did all the, what is it, the spinning babies to
yeah.
get your baby in an optimal position. And then what?
Yeah, and then we're just like, playing the waiting game. So at that point I was past my quote unquote due date, and I definitely felt the pressure. I started to feel the pressure from my midwife and obviously the people around me who knew what my due date was, because that's just what people do. And And that's why I feel like they're problematic in general because it puts so much pressure on the mom, and it's pressure and stress that's really like not needed because there's enough of that just like in the air because of like your own anxieties because you're about to give birth and like the stuff that you're having to process. And so I was really, really stressed from week like 38 to, my daughter being born. I know it was around week 41 when my midwife started to introduce these like quote unquote natural induction methods. And I kindly like declined and I was like, no, I'm gonna wait. And then it was like a couple days before I hit 42 weeks, and she was like, hey, just so you know, like I'm not gonna be able to be at your birth if you don't do something, like as if I can control that. But
And did
and
you
I
did you know that beforehand that once you hit 42 weeks she couldn't attend?
Yes. So this was
Yeah.
actually discussed, and I'll briefly, say that I had the conversation with her like very matter of factly, just like, hey, I'm never gonna transfer to the hospital. Um, so whatever like suggestions you have to do that, I'm gonna decline and I'm gonna end up having my baby at home unassisted if you choose to like uh drop me as your patient. So she knew like I guess how extreme I was about that part of like not going to the hospital. Um and I of course knew that by 42 weeks she would not be able to attend the birth. And so I was just, really praying that, maybe the baby would come, that day or the next day. So I just was letting it just be until it was like a couple days beforehand, and I was like, okay, I'll try the midwife's brew, which was disgusting. And it made me throw
So
up.
so for people who don't know, the midwife's brew is like a concoction of things. I want to say you said there was like
Apricot.
apricot, castor oil, and then was it like orange juice or something? What'd you say?
I think it's like another juice, possibly orange juice. And then I want to say it was like some kind of like either almond butter or peanut butter, something like that. It was disgusting. And it made me throw up, and my daughter didn't come. And then at 42 weeks, I showed up at my appointment reluctantly, but I did. And I was like, just miserable. And you know, she was just looking at me like, so what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'd much rather you just have my baby when she wants to come. And she was like, well, I can break your water, and that'll definitely get things going. And I just like looked at my husband like, should I do that? Like, I guess I have no option, right? Like, I just wasn't. I was very miserable at this point.
Yeah.
Things
Well,
were
it's
already
like
good.
if you want your midwife to attend your birth,
Yeah,
then that is the only option you have, which is
yeah,
where
you
you were
have to
at.
abide.
Yes.
Yeah, you play by their rules, and there's really no option, or you get kicked out of the game. And I knew I was going to be playing the game. I wasn't that oblivious to what I was getting myself into. I just really thought like, well, hey, I'm a pretty bold, strong-willed, outspoken person. And anyone who knows me knows that about me. So in my head, I'm like, there's no way that this midwife's going to manipulate me into doing something I don't want to do. But see, that's where I was wrong, because it has nothing to do with that. It really comes down to Like they have the last say. They have the last call. You don't. So
Yeah, it's not even really manipulation. It's more like
yeah.
subtle threatening and like coercing. Like it's like
Mm-hmm.
okay, like you can, but I just won't be able to be there. And you
Yeah,
know, like, and they say it in a
exactly.
very, very nice way.
Oh,
Of
it's very
course,
nice.
oh, very
Like in the
politely,
kindest
like,
voice.
so sorry, but my loyalty lies with my licensure that I worked really hard for. So if you go
Yeah.
past this arbitrary date, I can no longer help you. So sorry.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm not, I can't even be mad at it. You know, that it is what it is. We all know this
Yeah.
to be true. That, you know, they do have a license to protect and they did go to school for that many years, and you can choose to have someone like that, quote unquote, support you at birth, or you cannot. So
Yeah.
looking back, I mean, really, you know, I'm no longer the victim in that situation. I know that I allowed myself to be in that place. I know that I chose that. And that's just what it is.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I didn't have trauma from it. And it doesn't
Oh
mean
yeah.
that, you know, plenty of other women don't have trauma from that too. So, you know, I really do feel for women who, you know, fall for those traps. I mean, I did as well, as someone who had like a ridiculous, like abnormal interest in birth her whole life, you know, always was like listening to birth stories, knew about free birth, knew about, you know, midwife birth sabotage, all those things, and still chose that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I get it. I really do.
Yeah.
But like you have
So
other options is really the point, and I had
yeah.
other options. So anyways, to get back to the story,
So we're
I
in the room.
at that
She's like,
appointment,
it's 42 weeks. TikTok, what you gonna do? So what do you do?
so ultimately I decided, yeah, like let's just have you first do a cervical sweep, and then, you know, do the artificial rupturing of the membranes. And you know, like I said, I was really upset, but I reluctantly agreed. And I mean, goodness gracious, this that was so painful. You know, I was watching her as she was putting the little like finger condom on, and she didn't have a glove on her other hand that she was using to slide the little finger condom with the little like prick on the tip of it. And every part of me was like, what in the world? And I literally didn't even say anything. And I know that that was because, like, I think I felt so vulnerable in that moment, just like in the position that I was in, like laid out on a metal table with paper on it, and like my legs spread open, knowing that this woman is about to stick her fingers in my probably closed cervix, and it's going to be excruciating. And so I literally froze up. And again, like going back to, I'm a very outspoken person. And normally I would not stay quiet in a situation like that. But I really believe that, you know, as women get closer to birth, you know, there's like an energy shift, like not to sound, you know, woo woo or whatever, but like things start to shift and you're a lot more in your feminine. And so that whole like advocate for yourself thing, that's like a very masculine thing to have to do.
Hmm.
And that's just not the place that most women are in when they're, you know, walking into the birth space, you know, like
Well,
walking into like
it's it's like that's the design of women, is that the closer you get to birth, the softer things are
yes,
supposed to become. Your cervix is supposed to soften. Like I want to say
yes,
even like your pelvic floor, like isn't it like the ligaments or something even soften a little bit? Like
yeah,
everything about you softens so that this baby can pass through you.
yes,
And just like you said, as a woman who doesn't, has no problem speaking her mind, is very bold in that moment, you were very vulnerable, and you froze up because
yeah,
of the not just the physical position you were in, but also like the what's the word? Like the position your midwife was putting you in, and like the, well, I have to do this so that
mm-hmm,
she will stay with me. Like I have
yeah,
to let her do this to me. And it's just it's so heartbreaking. Oh gosh.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
it is. And so, you know, she went in for the cervical sweep, and then she went on to tell me how the positioning of my cervix is not really like that great, and that it's really high up, and that um it was really hard, and like I wasn't dilated at all. And she just kept like instilling this like idea of like, your body's not doing what it should be doing right now, basically. Like, and I just felt like crap, honestly. I'm like, oh, great. Wow, I guess, yeah, for whatever reason, my body's not getting with the program. Um,
it's
which,
almost like my body's not ready to give birth. It's almost like
yeah, like what?
maybe my body needs more time before it's ready to push out a baby. But like, thank you for your notes as
Yeah,
you traverse my
thanks
most
for
intimate parts.
yeah,
Like, thank you
right?
for letting me know. Ooh,
Insulting me while your fingers are in my vaginal canal.
right.
Anyways,
Like, how? I don't know. Like, just, oh, it's just not helpful. Like,
it's not.
oh,
And it's that, I mean, yeah, I just can't. I can go on so many tangents, but I won't.
so you
So
get the membrane sweep, and did she break your waters as well, or did she just do the membranes?
yeah, so she broke the water, but it I don't know, there definitely wasn't like a huge like gush of anything. It was very subtle, but she said that it was done. I immediately was like bleeding. And she's like, "Oh no, that's normal. It's fine. Just, you know, just be mindful of how much it is, but it's fine." I'm like, "Okay." And so I leave with my husband, and I'm like, "All right, well, are we gonna run a marathon now to get this baby out? Like, what are we gonna do?" So we end up like doing a bunch of walking. Then we go home, and then I'm like, I can't rest. I'm like, no, I need to make sure that labor starts. Oh, because of course she reminded me, like, so, you know, your waters aren't really supposed to be open for more than 24 hours. So we really need to make sure that like labor progresses and blah, 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 and all the things. So I was like, all right, well, let me go and like do all of these things to make something happen. Silly. I mean, obviously my baby was going to come anyway, but um you know, again, just like falling in line with what that whole game is. And I go to the park with my husband. It's like midnight, and we're like just I'm doing like sidestepping, and he's like coaching me through this. My poor husband, he was just like, I was miserable. I was miserable, and I was crying while this was happening because I already felt defeated. I already felt like I failed because of the way that this was starting. It was literally nothing of what I wanted. Um, and so I was really not in a good headspace. I end up saying like, I can't do this anymore. I'm in so much pain. Because I was having really bad cramps, and it was definitely because she broke my water. And yeah, and so I go home, and I was feeling feverish, and I was trying to sleep. I was like in and out of sleep. I'm tracking my contractions. I'm timing them because, my midwife was like, well, I need to know like how far apart your contractions are. So you need to time them because like otherwise, I'm going to just assume they're inconsistent. And I'm like, okay. So timing the silly contractions, and then I just stop because I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to go to bed. And then I wake up in the morning to like a huge blood clot, like really big, probably like, I want to say like a 4 inch diameter, like clot. Like it was
Wow.
huge. It was huge.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness, I've never seen a blood clot like that come out of me. So, and I see meconium as well. So I text her a picture, and I let her know, and she was not really concerned. She was like, okay, just, let's make sure there's no smell to it. But if there's no smell, everything's fine. And, it's normal to bleed. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'm like laboring at home, but I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling very shaky, very like, again, like feverish and just like flu-like symptoms. But I'm like, oh, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just birth. I mean, I know that could happen too. So yeah, maybe I'm just having like a rough one. But I do believe that because the natural process of birth was disturbed in my situation is probably why I felt so unwell throughout the process. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Um, and and so I asked my husband to call her over because things are really picking up and getting intense. And so she comes over, she asked if I wanted to be checked, and I agreed because I really wanted to know, like, where am I at this point? Like, how much more time do I have? Because this is, getting intense. And obviously, like, knowing what I know now, I know that that's silly too, because it that doesn't measure how much longer I have to go. But
Yeah.
um I just wanted to know. And she told me, she was like, well, you're only 6 centimeters. And I was like, wow, I was proud of that. And she was like disappointed in that. And
That you
I was
were
just,
only 6 centimeters.
yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, wow, you're awesome. You're halfway there, Tiffany. Like, you're more than halfway there. Like, amazing. Like, that was my first response in my head. And then, like, to see her disappointment was just like, oh, wow, here we go again. Like, I'm failing. And this is like,
Mm,
it's very sad to hear it like that. But that's like ultimately what my brain at least was registering with all of this, like these comments that she was making about
yeah.
the way that my body was progressing, the way my body was, you know, was just, yeah, progressing ultimately in like a bunch of different phases of, labor. Um so she leaves, and she's like, yeah, call me again when like things really pick up. And
She
I'm
just
like,
leaves. She just leaves.
yeah, she left. She left,
Oh,
and I lived in another borough too. Like, I literally was in Queens and she was in Brooklyn. So I was like, in my head, I'm like, wow. So if she's leaving, I must have like a really long way to go. Like,
yeah.
I'm like judging myself so hard. I'm like, wow, you're pathetic. Like, come on, Tiffany, get your head in the game. Um, so but really I was doing amazing. I
Yeah.
really was. I mean, I was, yeah, I mean, anyone is amazing at giving birth. Like, you literally just do it. The fact
Yeah.
that we even judge women in this
it's not
space.
like there's really anything you can do to make yourself dilate faster. You can, just get comfortable with the waiting. You move through the sensations, you try different positions, and just like really all there is to do is wait. Like there's nothing to do. So, yeah, you
Yeah,
were
and
doing
be
a
at
great job.
peace.
Yeah, and just try to, yeah, find peace in the surrendering.
And it's really
But
hard to find that with
I guess it
a
just, yeah, it
midwife.
just surprises me that she left.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, she left and then a few hours went by. I also forgot to say that before she left, she let me know that 8 p.m. was my cutoff until she was going to drop me from her care. So I had
wow, wow, wow.
previously signed, yeah, I had previously signed like paperwork stating that um like I would give birth unassisted if she left because I had declined like prior to her even bringing up hospital transfer. I was like, I'm not transferring to a hospital at all. So like that, don't even ask. Like I'm gonna have an unassisted birth if you leave. So she already was like thinking that in her head. So I guess that's why she just felt so, I don't know, she just very nonchalantly was like, "Oh yeah, hey, by the way, if you don't have the baby by 8, like I'm out. Deuces." And I'm like,
That's when I'm leaving
"Oh,
you.
okay." So, all right, I guess I have 4 hours to have this baby.
Yeah, no
um
pressure.
no pressure, no pressure. And by the way, you're only 6 centimeters, so you have a long way to go. Um,
And I'm
like,
leaving. Goodbye. You better be in better shape the next time I come around. Oh,
oh, I love to be able to like laugh about it now after like all of the healing, but like, oh, it's ridiculous.
yeah.
Um, so she comes back a couple hours later. I tell my husband, I'm like, she needs to come back here. Like, no, I like things are picking up and like I don't know like it feels intense, like it feels like I'm definitely like close, to this baby coming. And looking back, actually, if I had just had the baby on my own and not have done the whole thing with her, the baby probably would have come sooner, but because I was playing the game, it was just a constant like back and forth stressful situation. So she comes back and basically I like hide out in the bathroom because I just was like, I don't want to be around any of these people. Like her birth attendant, I had a birth photographer as well, and my mom and my husband, and like everyone was bothering me at that point. Like I didn't want anyone around me, and so I just went into the bathroom and I was listening to my worship music, and it was like in and out of the shower, on the toilet, shower, toilet. And honestly, I was doing all of the things like so intuitively that it was really beautiful. Like the moments of being alone in the bathroom were some of my favorite moments of the whole birth. Because I was like praying a lot, and I was really stressed. I was really stressed because this woman was telling me she was going to leave at 8 o'clock, and I wasn't prepared to have my baby unassisted, like, or at least I felt like I wasn't prepared. But I end up going back into the living room to go in the birth pool, and she suggests to try to start pushing. um and we didn't even like do another cervical check or anything to see if I had progressed or anything. She just was suggesting it, and I was like, I mean, okay, my body doesn't really like feel like pushy right now. And she's like, yeah, I know, well, sometimes you just need to like give it a little nudge and help things out. And I'm like, okay, that's not how I remember learning about birth, but okay. So she gives me like a scarf, and my husband wraps it around his back, and I'm like holding on to the scarf, and I'm like bearing down, and I'm not like pushing forcefully, but I'm definitely like using my breath and like gently pushing. And um it just didn't feel right to me. It really didn't. And it got to the point where I was just like, I'm not doing this. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And she was like flashing her flashlight in my vagina the whole time, and I had to like put a towel over my eyes because it was like the light was blinding. And then I was like, wait a minute, why am I letting her do this? And then I'm like, can you turn that off? But I'm like angry because I'm like, why are you taking me out of my space to like tell you to turn your flashlight off? Like, what?
I don't know
So
why, but it reminds me every time I've heard this part of your story, it reminds me of when you like get pulled over by the police at night and they like flash the flashlight into your
literally.
eyes and like into your car, like looking for trouble. Like I
And
feel
it's like, what's the point?
that's like the vibe I get from like the
Y-
midwife flashing the
yep.
flashlight at your
So
vagina. Like where,
authoritarian.
yeah, the authority. I have the flashlight, therefore I have the authority.
Yep,
Anyway,
exactly.
so
It's
were
it's
you able
ridiculous.
to express to her like, please stop shining the light. It's bothering me?
Yeah, I was like, turn it off. Like,
Yeah.
that's it. there was no nice Tiffany during this whole day, by the way. Um like I yeah, I was not nice. I was so angry. I was so angry. And also I totally forgot to say that this was all taking place on Halloween. And
Oh
I
yeah.
do strongly believe that there was a big part of this that was spiritual warfare and like
Hmm.
a spiritual attack, because this was the year that I left witchcraft after being like really heavy in that world for over 8 years, and then following Jesus. Like, crazy shift. And then I go into labor on Halloween night. Well, Halloween day, but all of this part was taking place Halloween night. Um and I was praying. I was like, Lord, I do not want my daughter born on Halloween. That was like a big thing, by the way. I was really
Hmm.
bothered by even like having to like make the decision to uh have her break my water, knowing that my daughter might be born that next day, which was Halloween.
Yeah.
um so I just wanted to throw that part in there because I really feel like that was an answered prayer for me, because my daughter wasn't born until 2 a.m.
The Lord's so
So
good. The Lord is
yeah,
so good. And I'm thinking
yeah,
too about how like in the alternate timeline universe where you weren't induced, she definitely would not have been born on Halloween.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, so that was a sweet part, but I will get to the birth part very soon. Um, so at this point she's like, okay, I'm gonna leave. And she had
Again.
actually stayed. She had stayed a little past 8 o'clock. So I was already anticipating that she was gonna do this, and she was like, are you sure you don't want to go to the hospital? And I was like, get out of my house, please. Please. Like, I'm not dealing with you. Um, like, just go. Like, you did nothing but stress me out since you stepped foot in my house, and I don't want to say another word to you. Like, that's really how I felt. And I expressed that to her too. And it's another interesting thing that I later found out after, debriefing the whole experience with my husband. My husband told me that she actually made like a pretty rude comment about me while I was laboring at home. Because there was a point when she was being nosy about what I was doing in the bathroom because I was in the bathroom for a long time and I kept like going in and out of the bathroom. And it was because I was going in and out of the shower because the shower felt really good. And she had made a comment about me being in hot water too much and it being bad for my baby. And I told my husband, you can tell her that she can leave. I'm not listening to anything she says and say that word for word, please. And this was not like, this is not what Jesus would have wanted me to do, but I was so angry at her for constantly disturbing my peace. And so I said that. And so then a few hours later, when she was getting ready to leave and she was just going over like the legal stuff with my husband, she was like, yeah, well, you know how Tiffany can be, you know, she's really stubborn. So, you know, that I know, you know, because that's your wife. And my husband was like, excuse me? Are you talking crap about my wife to me? Like um yeah, so she was clearly unhappy with me, which is fine because I was unhappy with her too. But
Well,
but
maybe it's for the best that y'all broke up then.
yeah, exactly. Like we just
It
needed
sounds
to
like it wasn't
part.
working out.
It was not.
Um,
So she leaves. Before she leaves, though, I did say I wanted to be checked one more time because I wanted to know if I was 10 centimeters yet. Because I was like, at this point, I I don't know what I'm gonna do, but if I want to know, like, all right, if I do get in a car to go somewhere, like, am I gonna have my baby in a car? Um, I also wasn't feeling well. Like I was really physically not well. Was still feeling extremely like feverish and lethargic, and I was like throwing up at this point too, and yeah, so I really just wasn't feeling well. And then by the time everyone finally left, I was like, okay, Lord, like what's going on? Like what am I gonna do? What do you want me to do? Um, I by the way, I was 9.5 centimeters when she checked me. I realized that I didn't finish that statement. So knowing this, I'm like, okay, I could have my baby any minute now, but my husband had asked, like, are you sure this is what you want, Tiffany? Like, are you good? Because you don't seem like you're good. And I was like, well, no, I don't feel good at all. And I was like, and I don't know. I need a minute. I need to pray. I just need to be by myself. So I started praying and basically um I I asked, I was like, you know, am is something going to happen like if I just have my baby, or is everything going to be okay? And I just hear like postpartum hemorrhage, and it was very clear it was like just only that. And I was like, what? That's not what I was thinking. Like, and I was just really confused by that too, because literally postpartum hemorrhage was not ever anything that was on my radar. It wasn't a fear of mine. It wasn't just, it never came up for me. And so I just knew like, okay, that's not my own stuff. So I was like, all right, let's get our stuff together. So now I'm packing a hospital bag while I'm like puking and I'm in transition. We hop in my mom's Jeep Wrangler. It's a 35-minute drive to the hospital. Super bumpy New York City roads in a Jeep Wrangler. Um, I will say that the little bit of I had done hypnobirthing because I had gotten certified as a hypnobirthing child childbirth educator, and so that was the one thing that I did do during my pregnancy, and that came in handy while I was in the car because I was like really trying to stay in like the most peaceful space possible because
right.
I was going through a lot of intense like feelings at that time. So by the time we finally we're like looking for the parking lot, there's like no parking lot in sight. Where I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like just yelling at my husband, like, I need to get out of this car. I'm gonna have this baby right now. I need to get out of here. And so we end up he just ends up parking in this like mystery parking lot that definitely didn't look like the right parking lot. And we go in through these doors that were totally not like the main entrance doors. And we basically get yelled at by the staff because they're like, what are you doing here? No one's like, you're not supposed to be here. This is only for staff. Like, what's going on? You got to get out. And I was like, I'm not leaving. Get me a wheelchair. I'm not leaving. And my husband was like, telling them to get me a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. It felt like my daughter's head was in the birth canal. So I was
Yeah.
like, really like just nervous to walk, and I just couldn't walk. It was a lot. So um they're like going back and forth with us. They're like refusing to do what we need them to do. And I'm like, okay, now I'm just going to cause a scene. So I'm like, well, I'm going to start pushing my baby out right now on this floor. Like, you guys need to get me into the room. What is going on? So then, like, he's like, oh, wait, okay. She's really
Oh,
like
she's
about to have,
serious.
yeah, like she's not lying to me. So they wheel me up to triage, and it's this huge like dramatic situation. All of a sudden 15 nurses come out of nowhere, and everyone and their mother wants to like be a part of the drama. It was like really really dramatic. And then we get into the triage room, and I'm getting all the questions like, what'd you eat for breakfast? Like, what's your weight? What's this? Like, do you smoke cigarettes? And I'm like, okay, I cannot do this. Like, I'm literally about to have my baby. And they're like,
Read the room, guys. Read the room. I am pushing a baby out of my body.
yeah.
Let's get to know each other later.
So then she I kept fighting her because she wanted to put the fetal monitoring and the blood pressure thing on me, and I was just like not having it. Like, I was just like,
Yeah.
no. um and they finally did, and that's when they saw that what my daughter's heart rate dropping, and they were like, oh no, we're putting you in for a C-section. And at this point I had left my body because I had two nurses on both sides of my arms poking me simultaneously with needles trying to get blood from me. I was so dehydrated that they literally couldn't get a drop of blood from me.
Wow.
And they like must have poked me like 10 times. The whole time I'm telling them I'm pushing my baby out, like my baby's coming, my baby's coming. And I'm like crying because I mean, all of a sudden my pain level goes from like an honest like 7 to 100 when I walked
Yeah.
into that hospital. Like, it was crazy. It was crazy how it jumped from like manageable in the car to like I get to the hospital, and all of a sudden I'm like leaving my body because I'm so overstimulated and no one's listening to me like at
Yeah.
all. And
Well, and also your one thing, your number one, like I don't want this is happening,
oh,
right? Like
is exactly.
the
Yeah.
one thing you didn't want to do was go to the hospital and now you're there. So of course you're disassociating because your body is still trying to push your baby out
Hmm.
and it's like I have literally no control over anything.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
yeah. So they're trying to draw blood from you. They can't because you're dehydrated. The baby's heart rate is dropping and they're trying to get you into a C-section.
Yeah, so the like the lead doctor what came in, and she was like, Tiffany, your baby's not doing well. Your baby's gonna die if we don't get her out right now. You
Oh
need a
yeah, of course.
C-section. And I literally just was like, uh-huh. Like I had nothing to offer anyone. I was just like, uh-huh. So she left the room to go get the paperwork. And then in that time, um, I'm pushing and no one even knows. And I tell my husband, I'm like, the baby's coming out. And he was like, huh? And I'm like, and I just point and he lifts the blanket up and he's like, oh, a head. Nurse, guys, come back. So of course they're like, oh, like, wait, stop, we need to bring you to the other room. And I'm like, oh, please, I'm not gonna stop pushing because you need to bring me into a special room. Like, what? Like, leave me in this
Like
room.
you could stop even if you tried. Like you could
I
stop even
know.
if you
I know.
tried.
It's
Oh,
ridiculous.
it's incredible that that's even a concept of like, oh, the baby's coming out of you, stop doing that. Like, what do you mean? I
It's
thought
like
that was
telling
the
someone
whole
to
point
stop
was for the baby to come
puking.
out of me. Yeah. Okay. So they need to
So
get you in another room.
so they are literally wheeling me from triage to the labor and delivery room while I'm pushing my daughter out.
The drama.
The
This is literally
drama.
like
So much drama.
scripted for a TV show.
It's a
I'm just
movie. It's like the typical
saying.
birth scene that they would put in a movie,
Yeah.
like just all the drama, all of the just everything. So I get in and they put a mirror right in front of me, which that I love that they did that because it was amazing watching my daughter come out. And this was like my favorite part. It was just incredible. Like as soon as I got in front of the mirror, I was like, I need you guys to put my bed up. I am not pushing on my back. I need you to. And they were like, you need to push right now. You need to push your baby out, like screaming at me. And I'm like, I will after you push my bed up. So and I just like, it was like I've been sitting on the bleachers the whole game, and then coach finally put me in and I'm like, yeah, coach, like, all right, I got this. I got this. Like I
Yeah.
was so excited to finally get to push my daughter out. And it was the most amazing part. It felt amazing. It was truly like ecstatic. And I pushed her head out in one push. And then immediately following that with a bunch of yelling to continue pushing, or else my baby's going to die. Um, so I was like, after I pushed her head out, I was like giving myself this talk like, hey, listen, you can take deep breaths. Like you don't have to push right this second. Take breaths and pace yourself. Cause I was being really like conscious to push in a very specific way because I didn't want to tear and all of that. And I was like, I know it's going to be easier if I just do it the way that feels right to me. So leave me alone. So I just canceled out all of the noise and I took my breaths anyway. And then I pushed. And on the second push, my daughter came right out. Um, and she wasn't conscious or anything like that. And they didn't even, they lifted her up and they like literally let me touch her for 1 second. And then and she, was just like, had like no form. It was kind of, it was weird because of the way they were holding her up. Like it would have been different if
Mhm.
I caught my own baby and had her on me and she was like that. But yeah, it's just the way that they were like holding her up and everything. So they quickly cut the cord, brought her over, and immediately was like resuscitating her. Um, it felt like it was a long time until I heard a cry. But my husband said like it was probably a couple minutes.
Yeah.
But there was like 20 people surrounding my daughter like when she
Wow.
came out.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was very scary. They like,
Mm.
you know, they immediately brought her into the NICU. She had, like um she had breathed in the meconium and she had the infection that I had, which, of course I don't find out until later, but we did have an infection and I'm pretty sure it was from my midwife, doing what she did with the rupturing of the membranes and it could have happened when she did the rupture initially, or the two cervical checks that she did the following day, who knows, but I did have an infection, which is why I had the fever and the chills and was feeling just really like flu like. um
Mhm.
and honestly, from here it's a blur, and all of the information that I have is from like little fragments of memory mixed with my husband. When we debriefed everything together, he like tried to fill in the pieces as much as he could.
Yeah.
But basically,
Mhm.
they were doing the torturous fundal massage, which I don't even know why they call it a massage, because it's not pleasant at all. um I remember them doing that to get the placenta out,
Mhm.
and the placenta did come out. I don't recall birthing it at all myself.
Mhm.
um my husband had left when they rushed my daughter into the NICU to like um put her on the breathing machine. He wanted to just observe what they were doing to make sure she was okay. And he quickly came back in the room to check on me. And he said that when he walked into the room, like, he was like, it was just a waterfall of blood coming out of
Yeah.
you. Um, and that was definitely when I blacked out, because I briefly remember, like, I don't remember them giving me Pitocin, although they did give me Pitocin, but they also, the one part that I do remember is the nurse coming up to me and letting me know that she was going to insert some medication up my butt, and that it was to save my life.
Okay, I just have to say right here that this shocked me the
Yeah.
first time, because the first time you shared, you didn't share that part. And so earlier today you shared it and I was like, "What?
Yeah, it's
What?"
yeah. So that I
Oh,
believe is like whatever some form of cytotech that they use for postpartum hemorrhaging, which I
yeah.
later, figured all of those things out. But it was very weird. I was out like a light after that. Like, I basically just slept for like 6 hours. And I woke up in like a panic, like, where is my baby? And honestly, just like in the weirdest state ever. Like, and my husband was super traumatized too, and so was my mom. From just like witnessing everything unfold, that like I could tell that they were like very like even like weirded out by the state that I was in, just because I was like, I felt like I was catching up with reality. It just was like a really shocking way to like, wake up and then like your baby's not there. And I'm like, wait, what happened to me? Like, all the things. I was on antibiotics for this infection, and they were telling me that my daughter was going to be in the NICU for like 2 weeks. And I was like, wait, what? Like, no, none of that. None of that.
Yeah.
Um,
So what was it like when, like after you woke up, what was it like when you first like got her and you had her? What did that feel like?
so as soon as I could get up and walk, I went to the NICU to go see her, and I started pumping, and I did skin to skin. And oh my goodness, it is so heartbreaking to see your baby with tubes in their nose and just being in like the little, it's just
Mm.
it was so sad. It was really hard, but I did skin to skin with her, and I was pumping, and I was giving her the milk in the feeding tube that I was pumping. And I spent every single second with her. Me and my husband took turns, but I stayed with her for most of the time. And I had been talking to the doctor, and I was like, look, I'm leaving here in 2 days, and I'm leaving with my daughter. So, like, what do we need to do to make that happen? And he was like, that's not happening. There's no way. And he was like, she has an air pocket in her lungs. They were still giving her oxygen. So they were like, at the level that she's on right now, like, there's literally no way that we would be able to get her oxygen like low enough. That's not realistic. Like, she needs to be here. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to give this up to Jesus. And so I had, like, all my whole family, like everyone that I knew was praying for my daughter to get out when we left the hospital. And literally the next day she was out of the NICU, which was like a true miracle. And even the
Come
nurses were
on.
like,
Yeah.
they were like, yeah, we don't know how she made that recovery so quick. Like, we have
Wow.
not seen that before. And I was just like, thank you, Jesus. And so that was just like, he answered so many of my prayers. And I know that, the enemy would try to completely sabotage, and what he was making for evil and bad, the Lord took and made good. And that's exactly what he
Yeah.
did with every single like part of my story.
Yeah.
Because you know I had I had taken a while to process this trauma. Like, there was a part in the beginning of my postpartum period where I was like really in denial. And then I was really angry. And I wanted nothing to do with birth. I didn't want to be a birth worker. Just didn't want anything to do with that world. Um, and it wasn't until like my daughter was around, I want to say like a little over a year, when I was like, maybe I'll get into birth work again. And and then I got like really intentional about my healing and was like, all right, I know I've processed this over time. I've went to therapy. I've talked it out with so many different people. And, I mean, I really had like processed this for that whole year and a half in different ways, just in conversations and in the different conversations that I had with people on it. But um and just sharing your story is very healing, because
Yeah.
you learn something new about yourself when you share each
Yeah.
time. So that was really cathartic for me. But then journaling and getting really intentional about like uncovering specifics about my birth and about myself, and like self love, and what I believe about myself, and why I didn't trust my body, why I didn't trust myself. Um and yeah, and so I've unpacked a lot of the things that ultimately led me to having birth trauma, why I made the decisions I made. Because, of course, like I said, I had other options. I know no one was forcing me. I did choose that. But I do believe that I chose that because, I think ultimately it was in God's will for me to you experience this clearly and to take some really good things away from that, which is
Yeah, of course.
which is where I'm at now,
Yeah.
um with just the work that I do with women. Most women giving birth in our country are going to have birth trauma in one way or another.
Mhm.
And going even beyond that, I believe that we all have birth trauma just from societal conditioning and just from being so conditioned to not trust our bodies in many different aspects. Um, and so that's I know God's calling me to really focus on that part of birth work and
Yeah.
speak to the women who have that trauma and really just help them to see that it doesn't have to be that way again, and that you don't have to be the victim in your life anymore, and you don't have to be the victim in that story anymore either. Um, like there is a lot of wisdom to take from a traumatic experience, and that's what ultimately I feel like it's brought me to that place where I can now look at all of that and say, wow, like I'm really proud of myself for having gone through that and then being able to reflect and shift my way of thinking, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so valuable to be able to hear stories like yours. And of course I love a beautiful birth story that's has all the good parts, but stories like yours are so so important, not just for you as the woman to be able to share your story, and that healing of like, getting it out there and being like, yeah, this is what happened to me, and not feeling like you have to hide it or feel ashamed of it, or like you're not, um like you don't even want to think about it. I think that a lot of women will sometimes have a traumatic birth and they just understandably just put it completely out of their mind because they don't know how to process it and they don't know how to deal with it. um I think it's so good to hear stories like yours, because at the end it's like, and then I processed it and I sat with it and I reflected on what happened and the choices that I made, and now I know what I would do differently next time. And not only that, but as a birth worker, as a doula, you now have a personal experience and testimony about, uh, you know navigating the medical system and navigating that birth trauma. So you have something even more to offer women who have been in a similar position, because not only do you have like the know-how, but you have the personal experience to be like, I get it, and it doesn't have to be this way forever. So yeah,
Amen.
I I love you,
I
and
love
I love
you.
Soraya, and I don't know that you and your husband are ever gonna have another baby, but if you do, I'm so looking forward to just witnessing what that would be like for you. But
Yeah.
I remember you saying that you have a birth trauma debrief offering that is going to be coming out soon. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So I currently offer birth trauma debrief sessions, but and that's just like a one-on-one call where we just go over the birth from start to finish, um and yeah, like I said, just sharing this story can be super healing, and having someone to reflect on things with can be really helpful. But something that the Lord has recently put on my heart that I'm super excited about, because I was not planning for this whatsoever, is this guided journal that I just made in the last 2 weeks. And I can't even believe that I produced it so quickly because it's so thorough. It's like 120 pages, and it is basically every single thing I went through to get to the place where I am at, like all of the questions that I asked myself, all of the questions that other women asked me about my birth that helped me discover things about the birth and stuff like that, and different exercises that I did as well, and prayers. And so that's called Healing Birth Wounds, and it's meant for the postpartum mama who's navigating birth trauma. And I'm just so excited to put it out there because I mean, if I had something like that to work with immediately postpartum after Soraya's birth, I probably would be at this place like in half the time or less. Um but yeah, I mean, it's so yeah, that's going to be available on Amazon or my website February 20th. And yeah, I hope you all love it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really great and it's going to have a lot of value.
Thank you, girl. And thank you for listening to my birth story 3 times. You're the
I will listen to your
best.
birth story as many times as you would like to share it with me because I do love you. And yeah, alrighty. Well,
All
I'll
right, my
talk to you
girl.
later.
See ya. Bye.